They reached the water at dusk, the surface flat and dark like glass laid over a sleeping eye. The gravel road slipped between tall pines, and the trees leaned inward as if listening to the car breathe. Nadia held the cabin keys in her palm and rubbed the cool metal with her thumb again and again. Omar drove slowly, his eyes lifting from the road to the lake and back, measuring distance like a careful swimmer. Their daughter, Rena, pressed her forehead to the window and whispered that the lake looked like a mirror that did not want to give anything back. The cabin sat on a small rise near a short wooden pier, the roof low, the porch tilted a little toward the shore. A ring of stones marked an old fire pit, and a weathered sign on a stump read, "Do not swim after dark." Nadia read the sign aloud. Omar laughed without smiling, and Rena said she did not like swimming at night anyway. They carried bags inside, opened the windows, and let out the smell of shut wood and old pine dust. On a shelf above the table lay a rolled map, a jar of matches and a brass whistle tied to a leather cord. Beneath the whistle a note weighted in neat square letters, "For fog, if you hear bells, stay inside and do not answer." Nadia raised an eyebrow. Omar said the owner liked stories, and he hung the whistle on a hook by the door. They ate bread and cheese and sliced apples, and they watched a thin white sheet of mist lift from the far shore. It crept low across the water, slow and careful, not moving with wind, moving with decision. Rena asked if a real village slept under the lake, and Nadia said the owner had written about a dam and a flooded valley long ago. Omar said the village had stood in the wrong place, and the river had taken it back with help from men in suits, and his voice sounded tired of such help. When the last color slid out of the sky, the water turned black. Not blue, not gray, only black. A lid over something that chose not to wake. The trees along the shore held their reflections for a breath, then let go as fog thickened and took the lines away. Nadia lit 2 lanterns and set them on the porch, their warm circles of light resting on the boards like coins. A woman walked the path with a basket, her jacket pinned with a small silver bell, her steps quiet on the needles and sand. She said her name was Mara. She said welcome. And she said do not look at the water after dark. Please, not even from a window. Omar asked why. Mara looked past him to the lake and answered that night water looks back harder than people do, and sometimes it shows what you should not see. Nadia asked what someone might see, and Mara touched her bell pin and said, "If you hear bells, close your eyes and count to 100. Then she wished them a good night and walked on. Inside, boards hummed softly as the dark settled, a river sound without a river, a sea sound without a sea. They tucked Rena into the small room that faced the trees, not the water, because a warning once spoken sits heavy even in brave houses. The main window faced the lake, a black rectangle like a card pressed into the wall. No shimmer, only depth. Omar poured tea and said he would take the canoe out at first light and show Rena even strokes and a good sweep turn. Nadia said yes with her mouth and no with the cold place at the base of her neck. Near midnight, the fog rose and fell as if something large breathed under it. Long, slow breaths that belonged to no person. Nadia woke to a soft tapping, not on wood, not on glass. A sound like a fingernail on a mirror, light and certain. She stood by the window and told herself not to look. She told herself to count to 100 like Mara had said. She told herself that stories like this live on air and die when ignored. She looked anyway, because not looking is a hard skill and fear is a teacher that speaks softly but wins often. Out on the water, a black oval floated where there should have been only night. A shape cut from the lake itself, flat as law and still as sleep. It caught the porch lantern and held the square of the window like a picture. And then it held Nadia's face, sharp and faithful as true glass. She saw the small mole near her lip, the pale scar at her brow from a childhood fall, the tired lines time had written, and the mirror water did not blur them. It honored them. Behind her reflection, another shape rose. The room, the chair, the lamp, and something standing where no one stood. A taller shadow that leaned nearer. The tapping came again, a little louder. A ring on a table, a nail on a glass, polite and patient. Nadia stepped back. Her heel caught the chair. The lantern flame shivered. The black oval quivered and drifted one slow body length nearer to the shore. She whispered Omar's name once, then twice, and on the third whisper he stood beside her. Blinking sleep out of his eyes, he said he saw only water and fog, because the oval had already dipped like a held breath released back into lung, and because not all eyes are chosen at once. Nadia pressed her palm to the window pane, and cold climbed her bones like a silver coin slipped between ribs. From far out on the lake a bell rang once, thin and careful, as if carried from somewhere deep. Rena's small voice floated from the bedroom. She said she heard it too. She said it sounded like a school bell that did not wish to wake anyone and woke them anyway. Nadia told her to sleep. Omar said some dams hang bells on buoys, maybe wind turned one. And his mouth said maybe while his eyes said no. When they lay down again, Nadia did not close her eyes. She watched the window turn from black to almost nothing, and in that nothing she still felt the oval waiting. The fog pressed against the glass and left a faint curve like a cheek had rested there. A mark that looked like breath that had learned how to stay. The lanterns burned low, the cabin ticked inside, and the lake held its long, slow note as if a choir waited below for a hand to lift. Nadia counted heartbeats and street names and capitals and bones. Anything to keep her mind full. Anything to keep her eyes from turning. The brass whistle on the hook tapped once against the wall without wind. A small sound like a coin settling in a drawer, Rena called again. Softer now. She asked if the lake had a mirror for every person who lived above it. And Nadia said no, and Nadia said yes, and Nadia said sleep. The bell answered from the dark with a second thin ring. And the fog breathed in, and the house breathed out, and the water did not breathe at all. Somewhere far beneath, something kept the count, and somewhere near the window, something waited for the next look. Morning would come, the map would open, the stories would grow legs, but for now the night kept its hand on the glass. Nadia lay still and listened to the soft tapping that may have been the old frame, that may have been a finger, that may have been the lake reminding her of a promise she had not made. The black oval was gone from sight, but not from the room and not from her chest, where the echo of a bell set its slow small anchor. Morning came pale and slow. The fog hung like a thin curtain above the water. The lake looked harmless under the weak sun, but Nadia could not forget the shape she had seen the night before. Omar carried the canoe down to the pier. He showed Rena how to hold the paddle, how to dip the blade and pull straight. His laugh came easier in the daylight. Rena wore a bright vest. She leaned forward with excitement. Her hair catching the breeze, she said the lake was whispering when the paddle touched it. Nadia frowned but stayed on the porch. She swept pine needles off the boards, her eyes never straying far from the water. She wanted to trust the day, but fear tugged at her thoughts like a thread not tied. On the path Mara appeared, her basket smaller now. A rope coiled over one arm. She greeted Nadia softly and asked if the night had been quiet. Nadia admitted she had heard a bell, and Mara's mouth grew tight. She pressed 2 fingers to the pin shaped like a bell on her jacket. She said, "Keep the whistle close," then walked on without another word. By noon, the fog lifted higher. The lake shimmered in wide sheets of gray-blue. Omar and Rena returned with wet pant legs, their laughter light. They ate bread with jam and told Nadia about a fish that leapt as though it wanted to look them in the eye before vanishing again. For a moment, Nadia allowed herself to breathe easier. She told herself the night had been a trick of tiredness, but her bones did not agree. That afternoon, they walked along the shore, the stones slick with moss, the water licking at their boots. They found a half-buried block of carved stone, letters worn almost away. Rena traced them with her finger and read a word that looked like parish, and another that looked like bell. Nadia took a picture with her phone. When she looked at the screen, she saw a faint cross below the line of letters, a mark her eyes had missed. When she looked back at the stone, the cross was clearer, as though once noticed it had decided to stay. Omar said nothing but brushed dirt away with his hand, his jaw stiff. At dusk, the fog crept in early. Rolling low and patient, Nadia shut the curtains tight and set 2 books on the sill to keep them closed. She placed the whistle by the lamp. Her hand lingering on it, Rena sat at the table drawing. She sketched the lake, the canoe, and a black shape floating on the surface. She called it a door lying flat. Behind the door, she drew 3 figures, thin and pale, their hands pressed as if touching glass, and on each wrist she drew a small bell. When Nadia asked why the bells, Rena shrugged and said softly, "The people below don't want to be alone. They use the bells to find each other in the dark." The room grew colder as night settled. The first sound came sooner than before. Not a knock, but a soft rhythm. Tap, tap, tap like a nail on glass. Nadia clenched the whistle in her hand. She pressed her lips tight and counted to 100 in her head, her heart beating fast. At 86, the lamp dimmed and flared again. At 91, the boards tilted faintly as though the house leaned toward the water. At 99, she thought she heard a faint bell inside her own ear. She reached 100 and whispered another 100, her eyes closed, her chest tight. In the morning, a faint smear curved across the window pane. like the mark of a cheek pressed there. Omar wiped at it with a cloth, but the curve did not vanish. It lingered like frost that had learned to stay. He muttered that it must be from Rena's hands in the day. But Rena shook her head and said she hadn't touched that window. Her voice small. They drove to the ranger's office on the far side of the ridge. A small building with boards on the wall, maps pinned with old nails, a man inside sipping coffee gone cold. He showed them an old survey. He tapped a spot with his finger. He said a church had once stood where the bay was now, and a bell tower had gone down with the flood. Rena asked if that meant the bell she heard came from there. The man shrugged but did not laugh. He told them 2 boys had dived one summer long ago, and one came back saying he heard a bell inside his breath for weeks after. Nadia felt the cold at her neck again. The same cold as the night before, on the drive back. The fog slipped between trees, hanging low like cloth left to dry that evening. They set the whistle on the table again, a coin they did not want to spend but could not put away. At midnight, the soft tapping grew louder. Like a knuckle on a door, Nadia told herself not to look. She told herself to count, but the weight in her chest grew until she could not help it. She slid the curtain an inch, just enough for one eye, and saw it. The oval black mirror floating closer than before, its edges sharp, its surface flat and depthless. Her reflection stared back, her face pale in the glass, and behind her, where no one stood, the face of a boy rose out of the black, thin and calm, his eyes too steady. The boy lifted his hand in the reflection, and as he did, a single drop ran down the real glass outside. As though his palm had pressed there, Nadia jerked back, the curtain fell, her breath shaking in her throat. From far out across the bay, a bell rang twice, slow and patient. Rena's small voice carried from her room again. She said the boy wanted to come inside and that he had been waiting. Omar held her tight and told her to stay in bed, his voice firm but cracking. The lake outside breathed fog against the glass, and the tapping began again, soft, slow, certain, like someone reminding them of a promise that had not yet been made. Morning broke pale and thin. The sky a dull sheet stretched across the ridge, the lake calm, innocent, pretending to be only water. Nadia stood at the porch railing with a cup of tea she did not drink, her eyes on the glassy surface, searching for a shape she prayed not to find. Omar spread the maps across the cabin table, mugs on each corner to hold them flat, his finger tracing the old roads now underwater. He found the mark where the bell tower had stood, a black cross in faded ink, right beneath the bay outside their window. Rena munched toast at the table, her eyes fixed on the curtains though they were closed. She asked if the boy from the mirror had a name. Nadia said no, then yes, then whispered she did not know, her answer unsatisfying even to herself. Later they walked the shoreline with rope and chalk, Omar counting steps from the cedar ridge to the notch in the bank. The air was heavy with wet pine, the water licking the stones with a lazy sound. They found another carved stone half sunk in mud, faint letters worn down by time and current. Rena touched it with her fingertip and said softly that the word parish was there again. And maybe another word, Belle. Omar brushed the dirt away with the side of his hand, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. Nadia took another picture. The phone caught a faint outline of a tower in the stone's shadow, something her eyes had not seen. Mara found them near the stump with the warning sign. She carried a thermos of tea in her basket again. Her face was pale in the morning fog. She pressed a small tin into Nadia's palm. Inside were 3 earplugs made of soft wax and a folded scrap of paper. Written on it were the words, "Do not listen, do not answer, do not echo." Nadia frowned and asked why echo, and Mara said the lake likes to hear itself repeated. And when you echo it, you let it live inside your chest. Rena squeezed Nadia's hand, her little voice low. She said she had heard her name echoed already, whispered back at her from the black water. That afternoon they drove over the ridge to a small-town library, its windows tall and dim, the smell of wet paper and dust. On a bulletin board hung a photo, a black and white picture of a church with a square tower. Children in heavy coats standing before it, their boots sunk in winter mud. The caption read, "Flood of Winter 1924. Dam gates closed early. River swallowed the parish." Bell rang until the last. In a glass case lay a leather journal, its pages yellowed and frail. The entry of the priest was written in tight strokes. He wrote, "I ring for mercy and for warning. The water climbs, it does not hear," he wrote. "I tie the rope at my waist, I will not leave them in silence. Bring them up, ring until you cannot." Rena pressed her hands to the glass case, her breath fogging the surface. She pointed at the priest's photo tucked inside. Around his neck hung a brass whistle, long and plain, a twin to the one on their cabin hook. Nadia's stomach turned cold. Her hand tightened on Rena's shoulder. The librarian said sometimes objects came up from the lake or were found on the shore, sometimes mailed back to the cabins by strangers who wanted rid of them. She said the lake never let go of what belonged to it, only passed things on like debts to new hands. When they returned, clouds stacked heavy as stone, dark gray shelves above the ridge. Omar tied the canoe to 3 stakes instead of 1. He weighed the line with stones as if stone could argue with water. They ate soup too hot for their tongues. They wanted heat in their bellies to fight the damp in their bones. As dusk fell, the fog rolled in thicker than before, sliding between trunks, curling like smoke. Nadia pressed the wax into Rena's ears and then into her own. She offered one to Omar. He shook his head. He said he had to hear if someone called. He said fear was no reason to shut your ears. His words strong, but his hands trembling. The first sound came soft, the tap-tap on glass. But stronger now, impatient, the second sound followed. A low rope sliding over stone. Slow and certain, Nadia's stomach clenched. She pinched the curtain edge and lifted it a finger's width. Out on the water floated not 1 black oval, but 2. One near the pier, smaller, and one farther out, larger. Where the bell tower should rest, in the nearer mirror her reflection stared back. And beside her rose the boy, his thin face calm, his hand pressed to the glass in the farther mirror, deep and faint. The outline of a tower loomed, a cross at its peak like a bone left in shadow. Omar came beside her and frowned, his eyes narrowing. But he said he saw only fog, only dark. Nadia whispered he was lucky, her words bitter and afraid. Behind her, Rena drifted from her bed like a sleepwalker. Her eyes half open, her steps slow and steady. She walked straight to the window, her hands at her sides. Her body leaning forward as if drawn, Nadia gasped. She grabbed her shoulders and pulled her back. In the mirror, the boy frowned, his eyes darkening, the water rippling with his displeasure. And in the farther oval, faint letters wrote themselves across the glassy black. The letters read, "Ring until you cannot," the words drifting like weeds pulled loose, then scattering into dark. The morning was gray and restless. The wind from the north sharper than before. The fog thinned a little, but it lay heavy on the water like a second skin. Omar moved restlessly through the cabin, checking knots, hammering nails into boards that did not need nails. Fear made his hands busy. Fear never leaves hands idle. Nadia boiled water again and again, filling cups she did not drink, watching the steam curl and vanish, wishing the fog outside could vanish the same way. Rena sat on the floor arranging stones and lines. She shaped them into a tower, then into a bell, then into a door, and her fingers lingered longest on the shape of the door. When Nadia asked her what she was building, Rena said softly, "It's not building, it's remembering." And she would not explain more. The fog thickened early, dusk arriving like a guest who comes before you are ready. Nadia pressed wax into Rena's ears again. She wrapped her own scarf twice around her neck. She watched the whistle glint dull in the lamplight. The first sound came not as tapping, but as a tug. The curtain leaned toward the window. The lamp flame bent sideways. Nadia felt the pull in her ribs. A thread tugged from inside her chest. She bit the inside of her mouth hard, the taste of blood sharp on her tongue. It reminded her she was here, she was still herself. Omar stood and said he would go sit on the pier. He said he would prove it was only fog, only night, only story. Nadia grabbed his arm and begged him not to, her nails digging into his sleeve. But Omar's jaw was set, his pride harder than her grip. He stepped onto the porch, then onto the pier. The boards damp beneath his boots, the rope lines humming softly as if something tugged them below. The fog touched his legs like cold fingers, brushing and circling. Nadia stood at the door with the whistle pressed to her lips. Rena clinging to her shirt with both hands. The lake was silent but not empty. It was the silence of someone listening, waiting for you to speak first. Omar sat at the pier's edge, his boots inches from the black surface, his reflection faint. 10 feet out, the black oval lifted, slow and steady, as though it had always been there, only now deciding to be seen. It floated nearer, 9 feet, then 8, the distance closing as if hunger measured it. Omar squinted, his voice louder than it needed to be. He said he saw nothing but fog, but Nadia heard the question in his words. The crack of doubt, Rena whispered. He is saying hello, Mama. The boy is saying hello. Nadia blew the whistle. The sharp note cut the air. A sound bright enough to hurt her teeth. From far out, the lake answered with a bell. Low, slow, as if rung through heavy water. The oval paused, but then another oval rose behind it. Larger, deeper. In its surface, Omar's reflection sat on the pier, but the reflection leaned forward, dipping its hand into the water. Smiling a smile Omar did not smile. Omar jerked his arms into his sleeves, his face pale, his real hands clenched in fists. The canoe rope tightened, the bow pulling hard as though something tested the knot. A steady tug, then slack, then tug again. Nadia stepped onto the pier with a whistle in her mouth, her heart pounding in her throat. Rena moved forward too, her steps calm, her eyes half closed like a dreamer following a voice only she could hear. Her bare toes gripped the board, and her body leaned toward the black water. Slow but certain, Nadia cried out. She lunged and grabbed her daughter's waist, pulling her back, but the mirror pulled too. For one awful breath, Nadia felt the tug in her own spine, as though threads ran from her ribs into the water. Rena whispered, "The boy says it's only fair. He waited so long, and now it's my turn." Nadia clutched her tighter, stumbling backward onto the porch. The whistle dropping from her hand, Omar slammed the door shut behind them, his breath ragged, his eyes wide. On the window, fog pressed hard, leaving the shape of a circle. Like a face resting on the glass from far out, the bell rang again. Once, twice, and then once more, slower, heavier. Each strike like a hand closing on their hearts. The mirrors outside drifted closer to shore. Two black doors floating where no doors belonged. Nadia held Rena close, whispering no and no and no, but she could feel the pull still inside her chest. The lake did not need to open the door of the cabin. It only needed them to open the door inside themselves. And as the last bell echoed through the fog, Nadia realized the boy was not asking Rena to step in. He was asking all of them, one by one, until someone answered. They did not sleep, not truly. They lay down, got up, and lay down again. The night stretched like wet cloth that would not tear. At 2 in the morning, the whispers began. Not in the walls, not in the trees, but in the water itself, as though the lake had learned words and was eager to use them. At first, it was only shapes of sound, long vowels with no bones, then words slid through, heavy with grief, heavy with weight. Nadia heard a woman murmur, "Bring up my child." She heard a man groan, "I rang until my bones wore smooth." She heard a girl whisper, "I am not cold when I dream." Each voice was clear as if spoken into her ear. Each voice belonged to no one she had ever known. Yet each felt close, too close. Omar heard only his own name, breathed again and again from far below. Soft, steady, patient. His head jerked each time. His lips answered yes without his consent, his body giving permission while his mind screamed against it. Rena sat up in bed, her eyes wide in the half-dark. She said the boy was at the window again, and that he was not alone this time. She said the priest stood behind him, rope tied around his waist, pulling the bell, pulling the house, pulling them all. Nadia pressed the wax deep into Rena's ears, into her own ears too, muffling the world, turning voices to hums. But hums are only voices pressed thinner. Not gone, she began to count. Slow and steady, 1 to 100, then again, then again. Her throat dry, her breath shallow. When she ran out of numbers, she counted the bones in her hand. The names of the months, the letters of the alphabet, anything to fill the space where whispers tried to enter. Omar stood by the door with his palm flat on the wood. He said it was humming. He said it was alive. He said it was waiting. He moved his hand to the wall and felt the hum there too. As though the lake had found veins through the timber, as though the whole cabin pulsed with borrowed breath. Outside, the black oval rose again, closer than before. It touched the pier. It pressed against the boards without wetting them. The pier groaned, not from weight but from resistance. Wood bending to glass, glass pressing like iron. In the mirror, Nadia saw herself, her hair loose, her eyes frantic. And behind her, the room stretched strange, too wide, too long. It was as if the mirror did not reflect only now, but then and before and after, showing corridors of time in one pane. Faces floated up, pale, broken, ruined by water. A woman with hair tangled like netting. A man with a rope mark burned deep into his throat. A child with coins pressed into his eyes and bells tied to his wrists. The bells chimed in unison, not metal clinking but water ringing, thin and sharp like light through ice. The mirror darkened, then cleared, and it showed Rena, then Omar, then Nadia, each of them sinking in turn. Their bodies quiet, their faces calm. No flailing, no fight. Only the slow descent of people who had chosen to sit, to lie down, to give in. Nadia shook her head violently, whispering no and no, her words breaking, her tears hot on her face, but each no rippled across the mirror. Each no bent and came back to her as yes, 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 the water changing her refusal into agreement. The whispers grew louder, clearer. The voices now demanding a gift, they said, only a gift. One to light the way, one to make the rest safe. This is how a lake bargains, not with mercy, but with hunger dressed as choice. Mara's knock startled them. Sharp on the side door, she did not come in. She called through the fog. She said she had tied ropes between her porch and theirs, that if the pull grew strong, they could clip themselves. They would not be dragged. Her words trembled with urgency, then faded. Her footsteps swallowed by the fog before thanks could reach her. Omar said at dawn they would leave. He said they would take the ridge road. They would drive until the lake was a memory, until the fog belonged to another valley. Nadia said yes with her lips, but no with her bones. She knew some things do not stay behind. Some doors open wherever you go. The wax in her ears muffled the lake, but not enough. She still heard the faint ring of a bell, a steady strike from far below, once, twice, and then a long pause, and then a third time. Slow and patient. Each ring pressed against her chest like a hand flat on the glass of the world, reminding her the mirror was not finished, reminding her the count had only begun. The fog the next morning did not lift. It lay across the lake and the trees like a heavy blanket. It turned noon into dusk and dusk into night. The air felt thick, the light inside the cabin dim even with lamps burning, the windows pale squares of gray. No horizon, no sky, no distance, only fog. Mara came again, her steps careful on the path, her face drawn thin as paper. She carried a thermos and 3 small candles in glass cups. She set them on the table and said, "Light them only if the lamps die, but do not look at their reflection in the window. Do not trust fire in glass." She sat with them for a moment, her hands clasped over her basket, her voice low as she told them the oldest story the village still spoke. She said the priest had rung the bell until the water rose above his chest. He tied the rope at his waist so the bell would sound even when he could no longer stand. She said the rope dragged him down, but the bell kept ringing, one last long call, a sound that traveled not through air but through water. She said the rope never let go, that it reached for any new hand, that the lake remembered the shape of hands, the warmth of wrists, the pulse of veins. She said the black mirror was the priest's own mirror, once hung in his home, blackened with soot from long winters, its glass turned dark to hold what the water took. Omar asked what the bargain was, his voice flat. Already knowing the answer he feared, Mara looked at him and said, "The lake offers a trade. One goes down bright, and the rest walk away dim." She said that was the law the drowned made when they realized they could still make laws. When silence did not mean they were powerless, Nadia whispered, "Who chooses?" And Mara answered, "The mirror chooses. It watches who looks longest, who listens hardest, who leans too far, who answers without words." Omar swore they would not look again. He swore they would keep the curtain shut and the wax deep in their ears. He swore no mirror could choose if they refused. Mara nodded once, the way a mother nods when a child promises never to touch fire, though she knows the burn is waiting. That evening, the fog pressed tight to the porch. It seeped under the door like smoke. The boards sweated damp. The lamps flickered though the oil was fresh. The whistle lay on the table heavy as a stone. Nadia set the 3 candles in a row but left them unlit, her hand shaking, her breath shallow. Rena sat drawing again, her small hand steady. She drew the bell tower once more, but this time a rope stretched from the tower to their cabin door. At the end of the rope she drew a hand, small and careful, not the priest's. Not a man's, but a child's. Omar hid the canoe paddles in the shed. He tied the boat to 3 stakes. He spoke aloud to the lake. He said, "You cannot have us, you will not take us." His words fell heavy into fog, swallowed before they reached water. Night fell quiet as a coat laid down. The first sound came soft like a spoon against a saucer. Polite, waiting. Nadia closed her eyes, pressed her arms tight around Rena. She counted in her head, 1 to 100, then more. But the pull came anyway, a tug on her hair, on her breath, on the hinge of her jaw, 3 times then slack, then 3 again. The whistle rattled against the table without breath behind it. The candles shook in their cups without a draft. The curtain hem lifted as though tide pulled inside the room. Nadia opened her eyes by mistake or by need, and she saw it. The mirror had risen from the lake. It did not float now. It hovered a foot above the black surface, its edge sharp, its body still. Her reflection stared back, and behind her stood the boy, and behind the boy stood a line of others, pale, waiting, their eyes steady, their hands raised. and at the back of them all stood the priest, the rope coiled around his waist, the bell behind him like a black moon. Along the edge of the mirror, letters began to write themselves. Thin strokes of absence cut into night. The words read, "One must go or all must go." Omar shouted, "Take me!" He shouted again, louder, "Take me!" But the mirror did not change. He screamed it once more, his voice breaking. But the mirror only trembled faintly as though amused. Rena whispered, "I will go, Mama, because I already know the bell, and it knows me." Her voice calm, her face soft. Nadia clutched her tighter, shaking her head, saying no and no and no. But the mirror quivered as if a smile rippled its black face. From far out a bell tolled, slow and heavy. From under the porch a drip answered. Fast and sharp, the two sounds braided together, pulling at the room, pulling at their hearts. And the mirror hovered closer, waiting, certain, ready to name who had already been chosen. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had. The walls pressing in, the fog pressing out, the air too thick to breathe. The whistle rattled once against the hook, then fell silent as though it too was waiting. The black mirror floated nearer, leaving no ripple behind, its surface flat and endless. In its face, Nadia saw herself again, pale, frantic, her arms wrapped around Rena, and behind her Omar with fists clenched tight. But the reflection was wrong. It showed them sinking, not standing, sinking slow, sinking calm as if already underwater. The mirror tilted, and the priest's face slid across its dark like moonlight on ice, his eyes hollow, his rope swaying, the bell swinging behind him without sound. The boy stood in front of him, closer, his eyes fixed on Rena. His lips moving with words Nadia could not hear, but Rena seemed to understand. The girl's small hand twitched, lifting slightly, reaching, as though remembering a promise she had never made. Nadia gripped her tighter, whispering no and no, the words spilling like blood. But each no bent in the mirror came back as yes, 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 and the glass smiled with it. Omar grabbed the whistle. He blew hard until his lungs burned. The sound shrill, desperate. The lake answered with a bell, not from far away this time, but from beneath the pier, loud enough to rattle the boards, loud enough to shake their ribs. The mirror flared white, then black again, its edge humming with cold light. On its face, the words wrote themselves once more. One must go or all must go. The letters sank into the black, leaving the surface empty and waiting. The candles rattled in their cups, the lamp flared, then died. The cabin plunged into half-dark. Only the mirror glowed now, pale and certain, its light spilling into the room, sliding over their faces like hands. Rena whispered, "Mama, it is me. I see myself already there." And she pointed at the mirror where her reflection smiled faintly. Calm, Nadia fell to her knees, clutching her child, sobbing, her tears hot against Rena's cold cheek. Omar shouted, "No, take me, I choose me," his voice breaking, his arms wide as if to hold back the water itself. The mirror quivered, its face rippling like disturbed glass, but then it stilled, its calm more terrible than any anger. From deep below, another bell rang, slow and final, one long note that seemed to last forever. The floorboards groaned, the walls hummed. The roof bent inward as if the lake had placed its weight upon the cabin. The black surface shone brighter, reflecting all three of them now, Nadia, Omar, Rena, and behind them a line of drowned faces, waiting with patience older than air. The boy pressed his hand to the inside of the mirror, and Rena pressed hers to the glass of the window without thinking. The two palms met, reflection to flesh, glass to skin. Nadia screamed and yanked her daughter back. But cold surged through the room like a flood without water. Her breath turned to frost. Omar staggered, clutching his chest, the whistle falling from his grip. The mirror darkened, and when it cleared again, only two reflections stared back, Nadia and Omar standing alone. The space where Rena had been was empty, only black water holding her shape, sinking slow, her face calm, her eyes closed. Nadia pounded the glass until her fists bled. Omar shouted until his voice cracked, but the mirror did not move. It floated back inch by inch, sliding across the lake, carrying the faint image of the girl within it. The bell rang once more, softer this time, distant already. The mirror sank beneath the fog, disappearing without ripple, leaving only still black water. The cabin sat in silence. The whistle cracked on the floor. The candles burned out one by one. When dawn came, the lake lay calm. Blue and harmless, birds sang in the pines, the world pretending nothing had happened. But Nadia and Omar sat by the window, their faces pale, their eyes empty, staring at the water as if waiting for it to breathe. On the table, Rena's drawing lay unfinished. The rope stretched from the bell tower to their cabin door, but the child's hand at the end of it was gone. Erased, only the faint outline of a mirror remained. A black oval sketched heavy and certain, and when Nadia closed her eyes at last, she heard it, one soft bell, low and patient, ringing from inside her chest, reminding her the bargain was done, reminding her the lake had kept its promise.